Hello class and welcome back to our course together. So the following presentation will be a quick overview of what we have discussed so far, and starting next week on Monday, new materials will be presented. Language acquisition. As we said before, the main purpose of language is communication, and this is why we need it in our everyday life. First, language acquisition. How does it happen and how does it move from sound to word and then from word to sentence? From sound to word, baby's early communication happens, and then babbling, and then we move to single words. What do we mean by baby's early communication? I expect you to pause this video for like 5 or 10 seconds and ask yourself this question and then move on. What we mean by early communication is anything related to nonverbal communication using crying, cooing, smiling, whatever. All of these gestures and sounds, focus here on the word sounds, actually communicate a message to the caregiver, whether it's the mother or the father, that the child needs something. This is why we use language, even though it's not verbal yet. This proves something, and according to Noam Chomsky, the famous linguist, it means that humans are born pre-wired. What we mean here by pre-wired is that they already have this ability to acquire language, and the rapidity and universality of stages prove this, that they have innate structures and they don't have to learn how to speak, just like they don't have to learn how to drink or they don't have to learn how to walk. They simply do that. It is an innate ability, genetic predisposition. They are born with it. Evidence that babies are programmed to acquire language are several, and we discussed in class the Haas technique and its studies have shown several findings that infants prefer speech to non-speech sounds, they prefer seeing a human face, they gaze at mouth movements at some point during speech, and infants until 10 to 12 months have this auditory discrimination ability, which we discussed in class as well. They are able to distinguish sound differences even in languages that are unfamiliar in their environment, language that is not spoken by their caregivers. Let's move on. We start here with babbling. As you know, this is considered a pre-linguistic stage. Even though the child is not saying full words, they are producing sounds. It usually starts 3 to 4 months. However, this might differ from one child to another. Keep in mind that these time frames are not are general, but you may always have special cases. During that period, we have this production of distinct sounds, common combinations of consonants and vowels. Usually they are bilabial sounds like p, b, m, etc. We have two processes, the reduplicated babbling and the non-reduplicated babbling. Here, let's look at this table, the babbling stages. I'm not going to read from this table or the fun facts. You can have a look at them. You can pause or refer to the PowerPoint. But my main focus here is during that stage. The child's jargon, where they have their own utterances. Imagine how when children start talking in this way that we find so cute, they're talking as if they're adults, but we don't actually understand what they're saying. They have their own repertoire of words that usually the caregiver or people who live with them at home are the ones who understand. We call this conversational babbling because the child speaks as if they are holding conversation with an adult. This stage is actually very critical because it is the stage that moves us to the first word stage, which is kind of a transitional stage. So I like you to keep in mind this important point that between this stage of conversational babbling and first word, they are not totally separate. They are happening at the same time. The child is still babbling, but at the same time they're saying their first word. What do you mean by the first word? It's the first word, full word that the baby utters. Usually, let's take examples from our Arabic culture. It might be mama, baba, tata, nina for a nina, let's say, daw, bu, whatever it is. It's actually a word that stands for a person or a thing. We call this stage holophrastic stage because, as we said before, we have a single word standing for a whole phrase, a whole sentence. When the baby would say something like mama, what he or she actually means, I want my mama, or mama look at me, mama I need you. Other phonological processes happen during that time. These are assimilation and omission. You may refer to your book or to the Quizlet set I'm sharing for the definitions. I'm not going to explain them again. Babbling still occurs along with single word production. This is the important point I highlighted earlier. And during that stage, we have nouns naming people, that is pronouns, proper nouns, and common nouns at the same time. Objects as well, verbs, social personal words as in hi, bye, good morning, thank you, and pronunciation might not be accurate. This is important. If the baby is not pronunciating the word accurately, it doesn't mean that the baby is not speaking your first word. It is still a word. It is no longer a sound like what we had before, the baba and dudu and gaga, etc. Two other things happen during that time. They are overextension and underextension. I'm not gonna explain these terms as well. You can refer to them. Here we move to from word to sentence, the two-word stage and then the telegraphic stage. The baby is now around 18 months. That is a year and a half, and between a year and a half, the baby has around 50 words. Of course, it might take longer than this with some children or earlier. During that time, we have the two-word stage in which the child communicates a certain need or desire using two complete words. Usually these words contain a noun and the other would be a verb or a preposition, let's say. Two things that might happen for exceptional cases are the word spurt and the fast mapping. What we mean by word spurt is when the child remembers a word and starts saying new words every day on a daily basis. And this, according to linguists, might be the result of fast mapping, where children remember a word after little exposure. It might be just once or twice that they hear a word and it sticks to their mind and they start producing it again. Let's move to the telegraphic stage, which happens around the age of 2 and a half. And what we mean by telegraphic is when the child is producing more than 2 words, that is 3, 4, or 5 words, almost a complete sentence. What happens here is that they omit function words. They might be using a noun and a verb and another noun. Let's say, for example, Baba go work. That means my father has gone to work. It also includes largely lexical words. You know what lexical words are, nouns. They are free morphemes, nouns, adjectives, and verbs, etc. During that period, a lot of researches have been done and studies, and we have the MLU system for measuring language development, which means when we count the number of morphemes produced in a number of utterances by babies. What matters here is the findings of this research. According to Walter Brown, each child has his own rate of development. However, the stages of development, especially when it comes to grammatical units, happens in the same order. So, the frequency of input and the spoken language, no matter what the language is, or how much the caregivers are speaking, this is the input to the child, is they do not have an effect on the rate or the order of language development. The rate and the order are the same for all children, but the amount of words that the child is saying and how faster it differs from one child to another. These are other factors which could be discussed later. However, as we said, input and the spoken language do not affect the rate or the order. Children have the ability to generalize rules that they have not been exposed to before. That is, use one rule, let's say the simple past or the plural, and apply it to words that they haven't been exposed to yet. As a reminder, the WOG test. 1 WOG, to WUGs, even though WUG is not a word that they know. Children can apply underlying rules to new examples. Similarly, children do not only imitate utterances, and this is very important, and I'd like to keep in mind for our next session. They can create new ones. If you think a little bit, you have a child who is 3 years old, let's say, and they start saying all of these full sentences. However, are these full sentences they're producing familiar? Like, are they just repeating? Are they imitating? Or they are creating? And this creativity which we have is something that raises question marks about language acquisition. By the age of 5 or 6, the child's complex syntactic constructions and phonological repertoire is complete. That is the age where the child in our school system is in grade 1 now, or let's say K-3, and by now their first, remember we're talking about first language acquisition, is fully developed. This is it. I'd like to scratch your head a little bit and think about the following questions for our next session. What explains babies' ability to acquire language? How do comprehension and production happen? What factors play a role in language development in babies? Like, what helps babies develop language? Can an isolated baby like Tarzan eventually speak alone, like without human interaction? And how do toddlers start saying complete and grammatically correct sentences before going to school? Notice this if you have any kids or siblings or nephews or nieces. At some point when they're 3 or 4 or 5, they are saying full sentences that are grammatically correct. The structure of the sentence is correct. However, they haven't been to school yet. What explains this? Thank you for listening, and see you soon, hopefully.